Hello, hello, and welcome back to today's episode of Twomey Time. I am your host, Megan, and on today's episode, we have a very special guest joining us. We have Brooke Bettis Twomey. She is a registered nurse. She obtained her bachelor's in science of nursing from Villanova University. She also minored in theater, and she is a certified pediatric hematology oncology nurse. She is a mother of two, and she also is a pilot. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about how she fell into the career field of nursing, but also how she obtained her pilot's license while she was a nurse and her passion for flying and becoming a female pilot. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and welcome, Brooke. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Meg. Hi.
Hi. So Brooke currently is working as a nurse, which is wonderful. How long have you been a nurse for, Brooke?
Oh my gosh. I've been at my current job for 10 years. So I've been a nurse even longer than that.
More than a
Yes.
decade. Yeah, very seasoned then, which is great. And Brooke got her BSN from Villanova University, which is in Pennsylvania. Some of you might know it. And so, Brooke, did you do like a traditional four-year path? Is that what you
I
did?
did. Yeah. So that nursing school allows you to apply directly to the nursing school or apply to undergrad and then get into nursing school later. So I did the first option, which was straight in for 4 years.
And Brooke, can you tell everybody where you live
Oh, I
currently?
live in Boise, Idaho, where I grew up.
So a little bit different than
Yeah.
Pennsylvania when you went to
Mhm.
school. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. But today, Brooke, I really want to like highlight how just some of the cool aspects that you have outside of nursing. We'll touch a little bit on nursing as well. But usually, I like to start with a little bit of an icebreaker just to get to know you a little bit. So I've been liking to ask, like, what have maybe one of your guilty pleasures been recently? What are you reading or maybe watching that you might want to recommend, or just something fun that you've been doing on your own time?
Yeah, we've had kind of crappy weather here lately, so we've been watching a lot. We just finished The Bear. Have you seen The Bear yet? Oh my
No,
gosh.
what's that about?
It's set in Chicago, and it's like this amazing chef and his brother dies and he takes over this restaurant that's basically
Oh.
just sandwiches, and it's really, I mean, not for kids. It's very intense, but there's one episode in the second season. It's only two so far, and it's called Forks, and it was so good, and I think about it all the time. I rewatched that episode 3 times. So if you're
Oh my gosh.
getting through the first season, get to the second season because it's amazing.
Is it on Netflix or where can you
I
find
think
it?
it's Hulu, but yeah,
Hulu. Okay. Yeah.
it's really intense. The first season is very intense.
Is it one of those you have to watch a couple episodes to get into it? And
Definitely. Well, it's also
okay.
like, I think it's kind of a dark comedy, but it's also kind of just dark. So you have to kind of look for the comedic moments a little bit. But if it's your style, I think you'll
Okay.
know kind of early on.
Okay, The Bear.
The
So
Bear.
I'm gonna have to put that on my list. I don't watch too much Hulu, but I feel like I go there and then skim and then don't know what to watch.
Yeah,
And I'll have to put that on my list
it's a
then.
good one.
Just
Some friends told me about it, so yeah, it's awesome.
The Bear. So for those of you Huluers out there, The Bear, check it out. So um awesome. So I guess getting into I would love to ask you if nursing was always something you wanted to do, or if this was kind of like a you just found the career path, or did you want to be something else when you were growing up and kind of fell into the career field, or what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, no, nursing was a total pivot. I remember telling my mom that I did not want to be a nurse specifically because my parents are both medical. My dad's peds neurologist, and my mom was a nurse and was primarily pediatrics as well. And they all wanted one of us to go into medicine, and none of us were that interested. And then, yeah, when I was a kid, what did I want to be? All kinds of things. Probably theater. I really loved theater and
Theater.
performing and music. I played the cello. I was really into those things. So before, yeah, becoming a nurse was a big surprise to all of us.
Because you did theater at Villanova, right?
Yeah, I
So
minored in theater actually
yeah.
while I was getting my BSN, which was,
Oh, I actually didn't know
yeah,
that.
it was because the nursing school was super supportive. It's hard to minor when you're in nursing school. You know, you have a really crazy schedule, and
Yeah.
so they would let me take courses with the graduate theater, which were like real actors. Like they were really really good. So it was a really cool
Oh.
experience all around that they let me do that because of my nursing schedule. So
So it sounded like they were super supportive when you were applying to the program, because you're so right. It's almost impossible to have, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's really difficult to have a
Hmm.
minor. And especially something like theater that's so time intensive. Anybody who knows theater or has friends that are in theater, it's very time intensive. It's not something, because it's usually focused on performances or, I don't, usually there's a lot of rehearsing time as well. So how did you balance that? That seems difficult, especially in a more graduate based program. I'm sure they were, a little bit further on into their theater
Yeah,
careers.
oh yeah. So I didn't take the full graduate course load at all, but I was taking the kind of undergraduate minors, and then I wouldn't be able to squeeze in the normal courses
Mm.
into my day because we were waking up at 5 a.m. for clinical, like
Political.
couldn't get it in. So because the graduate theater had some night courses, they allowed me to take those to fulfill the minor. So
Oh,
none of it
I
was
see.
made me perform, but we still did perform. um, I'd squeeze in shows here and there, but definitely as nursing school went on, it was harder and harder to do. So, but it
Yeah.
was a nice way to
Yeah.
kind of scratch that itch and like have an outlet of sorts during nursing school. I think that was uniquely good for me to have a little
Totally.
pocket of my life that wasn't medical.
100%. Especially when you're really getting into your last year. We all know it's like consumes your whole life
Hmm.
for a little bit. And then even afterwards, because you're so new to the career field. Do you do any local theater or community theater now? Or I know you play a few instruments.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, no, not really. When I graduated, I still dabbled and I would do like played in the pit with my cello for some plays, and I did a um, I guess that was before graduation. I did one show before I graduated, and I haven't really done local theater since
wow.
then. I'll still do some community music here and there, but nothing that's really set in stone. I tried with little orchestras and stuff when I could, but it was hard to squeeze in. That first year as a nurse, you're really drowning. So
Yeah, I give you a lot of credit for even like trying to continue on with
yeah.
it. And I think I didn't grow up with a lot of, not that I didn't grow up with a lot of music. Like I played some instruments, but it's like the pivotal years where you dabble with instruments
Hmm.
and then you maybe continue or you maybe don't,
Yeah.
depending on if you like it or not. So that's really cool. I guess, how did you pivot totally if both of your parents were in the medical field and wanting one of you, like I know you have siblings, so wanting one of you guys to go into the medical field, how did you even like fall back on nursing? Was it more of like a like, oh, this seems like a good career path, or like this is just my backup because I really think I want to do theater, or you had some pivotal moment that you decided, okay, yeah, this is the right path for me?
Yeah, it's more the third. So my junior year, I was really still kind of thinking about schools and not sure and really didn't know what I wanted to do because all of my interests were like different things. I liked history and theater and music and
Yeah.
writing, and I really couldn't settle down. I wanted to do like 40 things. And then that was the year that one of my best friends got cancer, leukemia. It was AML, difficult to treat, and just like totally paused all those extracurriculars for a little while. And so spending time with him in the hospital, he was, the nature of his disease, he was inpatient a ton. And so mostly the people that I saw and got to know on the floor were his nurses, and I loved them. And I thought they were like the best people on the planet and still do. Um, and just their skill level and the science of it, kind of things I hadn't considered that I could be good at or interested in, kind of came together when I was watching how they treated humans and how amazing they were. So that was a huge portion of my life junior year. And by the end of it, I had decided like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. So again, no one was more surprised than my parents, who I was maybe more of the rebel out of the three girls. And so when I was the one who decided to follow exactly the path they had followed, they were all kind of like, okay. So I applied then just from that year, from that decision into nursing school. And that's also why I decided to go to Philly, because the at the time he relapsed and needed a bone marrow transplant, and we didn't do those peds bone marrow transplants at all in the state of Idaho at that time. We do now. So he had to go out of state for that, and I was googling. Google was like googling what the best transplant program was in the country, because I just wanted him to go there. And it was
Yeah.
CHOP, which is the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And so when I was looking at nursing schools, I decided I wanted to work at CHOP, and I did end up getting to work at CHOP. And that's one of the reasons, really one of the major reasons why I picked Villanova, was because it had a relationship with CHOP. All
With
kind of
CHOP.
random things that brought me there. So yeah.
Wow. Wow. But I think it's so special because you ended up working there
Hmm.
afterwards, after you graduated, which I think, like, first of all, hematology, oncology, that's really difficult to even like get your foot in the door as a new grad, and especially since you were so passionate about it. Did you go straight into this specialty, or were you working on the different floor first, or you got right in right
Well, so
away?
at CHOP, heme is separate from onc. So I went straight into
Okay, gotcha.
pediatric inpatient hematology, which was such a good education, but like wild. And that was my first job. I had done a rotation there in nursing school. And I remember I'd just come off of gerontology, which I actually kind of loved. I love elderly people. And anyway,
Very different
very
though
different.
than
And so
the
I was like, oh, is
opposite.
that what really want to do? Like, considering it. And then that first day I remember walking to that floor and seeing all of the bright colors and the tiny little blood pressure cuffs and the little oxygen, and I was like, oh no, never mind. This is it. I belong here. And that's where I applied and got my first job.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. And you're still doing
Mm-hmm.
it 10 years
Yeah.
later, which is even better. Just goes to show that like you're truly probably were very passionate about it. And I think you made the right decision. You can always switch to go do
Yeah.
geriatrics. That's always a
Very true.
possibility. And then as far as like tell if you don't mind telling the audience, so usually I know we talk a lot of or I speak a lot to the transition into practice and how and if you can recall now that it's been so like I feel like we all forget over
Mm-hmm.
time, but I feel like we all remember our first job
Yeah.
specifically as a new grad because we're babies. We're literally babies going into be nurses. It's wild to think about like once you're out a couple years to look back on that experience. How was your experience, I guess, as a new grad nurse? How was your transition, and maybe something that you felt could have been helpful for somebody else that's going through the same process
Yeah,
now?
it was tough. It was tough. I was a very intense student, and I really like really cared about the book learning, really cared about clinicals and doing very well. And nursing, you can be as prepared as you can
Yeah.
be, and you still have no idea what's going to get thrown at you. And just making my peace with that was tough. And I mean, I would get annoyed in nursing school, and people would say that that first year is really hard, and I say, well, yeah, but what do I do with that information? How do I get better? What do I do? Um,
Yeah.
and
Because
everyone's
it's a lot of tasks,
yeah,
right? It's a lot of like nursing school is like figuring out to get the basics of everything. And when you go into a specialty, it's not like there was a class on hematology. There was no class on hematology in undergrad
yeah.
at the time. So you're also like learning a whole new subspecialty, probably to like a graduate level
Mhm.
that you just didn't get that experience as an undergrad because you never
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. Yeah. So the knowledge base was different. We also kind of functioned as general peds, and then we would also staff a seasonal bronchiolitis unit. So all of that was very scary to me. And one
Yeah.
of the things that would freak me out the most, had a bad early experience with, we would get the status asthmaticus kids who were coming up from the ER and not doing well. And you pushed mag, you had to stay there at the bedside for 90 minutes, but then you had 5 other patients, on a night shift, and everyone was so sick. And yeah, so it was definitely a lot. I think a big thing everybody says is hard to know ahead of time, but having a good mentor made all the difference. And I think about that first year all the time because training up new nurses and just seeing it in their faces and remembering what that feels like. And I remember telling someone once, it's kind of like starting out as a new nurse. You have all this knowledge, you really want to do well. Everyone wants to do awesome and save the day and be great. And I was like, but kind of the way I felt all the time was like, if you're in your backyard and you hear like a kid screaming and you think, okay, they're probably fine, like they're probably they're playing, I'm going to stand listen. But it's probably nothing. But if it's actually something and I didn't do anything, but do I call 911? Because when I heard one kid scream, and like, you feel
Mm-hmm.
so responsible for all these things, and you have no idea
Mm-hmm.
what's scary and what's not, early on. So
Mm-hmm.
I do think in general, as a nurse, I lean kind of conservative anyway. I think like specialties, as a specialist, I get to do that and just check labs whenever I want. Um, but
Yeah.
so that
But
was
also you're
hard for me.
monitoring people so closely. That's your
Yeah,
special,
and it
like
was
that
easy. They
is
all have
part of
central
your
lines.
specialty.
You just pull labs all the time. But I did, yeah. So finding a mentor who I really trusted was really good for me, and I paid attention early on to there was one nurse who just never had any drama. She never talked badly about the other nurses. She focused on her job, and I was like, she's the person I'm going to ask questions of, not the one who complains about all the new nurses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was amazing. Her name's Uran. I think she's still living in Philly, but she was awesome. So I always think about her when I'm training new people. Like, no drama. Be the person people will ask questions of because they pay attention if you complain a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing was kind of finding those moments that you can hang on like for a minute, where like you could have a really rough day, but there was one moment where you made the difference for somebody. And that's still true. That's still true 10 years later. So
Yeah.
brought you back the
No,
next
that's a good
day.
point. Because that's what keeps you moving forward, is finding the joy in what you do,
Mhm.
even if there's not much joy in your specialty, is finding something that you can see that you made a difference in somebody's life and that you want to go back the next
Right.
day and you're excited to. Do you do a lot of teaching now, or are there a lot of new grads in your area that come
So we don't, for
into your
oncology, we
specialty?
don't really let new grads do that unless they've
Mm-hmm.
have at least 2 years PEDS experience already. But we
Okay.
do, I do a lot of precepting when we have new hires or people transitioning into our area, which I love to do. And then there's also, we kind of assist sometimes with teaching chemotherapy and biotherapy prep, that kind of thing, to different areas. And then also we're constantly teaching parents and families and kids at an age appropriate level about everything that they're going through. So yeah.
Totally. I feel like in your field you wear so many hats, because it is teaching, it's collaborating with families. You have to be such a great communicator. You get to know these families super well, and then also giving back to the new generation of nurses that are coming in and having that empathy towards them and being able to really be super patient and like continue to grow your knowledge base and also help others. I think it's hard to be at the point where you're able to do all that. So uh, how long did it take you to like feel comfortable and confident in your career field as a hematology oncology specialist, as a nurse?
Oh my gosh, years. Years. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I reached a time on the inpatient heme floor where I was like, okay, a lot of what I saw was sickle cell, and I could dive in with that feet first and get that under me and understand it really well. I think by that first year, I felt really confident in that, and that's kind of helped me out here where we don't see it as often. We're seeing it more and more as people move here, but and then moving to onc at a different location was like starting all over again in many ways. I do think, I mean,
Yeah.
everyone talks about that inpatient experience is super important off the bat. And I agree, because I think I knew at that point how to be a nurse. It was just absorbing new information. So I felt a lot more comfortable asking for help when I didn't know something. It didn't feel stupid. I felt like, explain that better again. Can you tell me that again? Felt more comfortable. So all of that, when did I actually feel like I was like a true hemonc nurse? Probably like, I'd say like 3 or 4 years in, honestly, before I felt like I could even teach any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. I mean, it takes
Yeah.
time, and you're so right, is like getting to know your basic knowledge, feeling really confident in your skills as like a nurse on the floor, and then being able to grow and build on those skills. It's like you do reach a point in where you say, I got this general vibe. I know when something's not right.
Hmm.
I know what to do when something's not right, and you just feel more confident. So 3 or 4 years. So that's really good to know too. That so if there's a new grad listening that's interested in hematology, oncology, or maybe one of the other, so sometimes you do need experience. Sounds like most of the time you might need experience as a pediatric nurse
Yeah.
first, and maybe about 2 years, and then before you kind of switch into a specialty,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
interesting. So I like to pivot, Brooke, because I am so interested in how you are a nurse, full time nurse, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to be a pilot, because I think that's so cool. I think that's so amazing. First of all, it's like really neat to meet a female pilot. I did not grow up knowing any pilots. I don't think I even knew a pilot or somebody that like I knew that was going, I mean, like maybe in college when there's ROTC, but I never met somebody that was like, yeah, I'm going to go be a pilot. And then not to mention I'm a nurse, and then I'm going to be like on my side time I'm going to be a pilot. How did that even happen? Please tell me. I'm so
Well,
curious
thank
if that
you.
was like a lifelong dream or if it just like happened.
Definitely lifelong dream. And also, I mean, yeah, lifelong dream, but something I thought probably wouldn't happen until I was like in my 40s or 50s. So I feel very lucky um, that I got to. I had some legs up, that's for sure. So yeah, where do I start? I was always interested in being a pilot. I think everyone wants to be able to fly when you're a kid, right? It just sounds amazing.
100%.
um,
Yes.
and then my dad flew planes as a hobby. But there are so many places in Idaho that you can't get to by road, that are never going to have roads built because it's protected land. And so a lot of my favorite places we got to by whitewater rafting or by flying in. And that was it. That's the only way you can get to some of these like deep, deep places unless you're going to, horseback in for days and days. So a big part of me wanting to get a pilot's license was that I wanted my family to have the same abilities to explore those things. I can't rely on these rides forever to go into these places. And I spent my summers as a kid. I think that was really like from 9 to 13, I'd spend summers in some of these places and sleep under the stars and horseback. And it was just a huge, huge part of my life that has brought me a lot of joy, is that kind of outdoor, untouched nature areas. So always kind of wanted it, always had it on the bucket list. Neither of my sisters are interested again, so it was up to me to do it.
Nobody else was like interested at all. No, like as
maybe kind of loosely interested, but like Allison, my oldest sister, might have. Laurel is not interested.
Not interested, because you have to be a certain age to like even be like, is it like kind of like your license, like car license? Like, do you have to be like 16 or I would imagine there's an age limit on that
16,
too.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
To start.
So in high school, was that even on your radar, or were your parents like, no way, not yet?
So, and I mean, it costs money, and it's also an expensive hobby. I kept trying to justify it, being like, well, then I'll be able to fly, and I'm paying for these commercial flights. And it's like, it kind of ends up being the same price because you're renting the planes by the hour. You have to be part of somewhere that's going to let you rent a plane or own a plane, which I don't.
True.
And paying for fuel. I mean, all that stuff kind of adds up. You're like, okay, it really, at the end of the day, is expensive hobby. And so if I had gotten my license when I was 19, there's no way I could have reasonably kept it up, with all that stuff going on. So, And
I feel like it's so, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's like so different now too, because I feel like there's way more scholarships available for young women or young individuals that do want to be a pilot, but you're so right. It's very cost prohibitive. It's, and I think that's why like maybe people don't think about it as much, because it was like that. But now I do know that there's a lot more like opportunities, which is awesome. But it's, sorry. I just wanted to, so I just think it's so neat that now there is that availability versus probably when you were 16, obviously that wasn't a thing.
Right. Well, and people like there's, a friend of mine got an aviation. She's also a female pilot. She got an aviation. That was her degree at a school. And so getting her license was part of that. So there's a lot of paths to get it if you're interested in being a career pilot. But I kind of already had my foot in medicine and knew that about myself. So adding one more costly thing on top of nursing school wasn't going to cut it early on. And I did think I'm getting ahead of myself, but I thought a lot about like, if I had done this when I was like 19, I could have just like plowed through it. I didn't have that many responsibilities. I could have just like gotten my head right and gone out there a lot more. I was maybe more of a risk taker before I had kids. And so me starting to fly right after I had my first baby was a little complicated, but overall I think was good for me because when I was doing all this training, it wasn't like, can I pass the test? It was like, can I trust myself to put a baby in this plane, And so I think it made me a better pilot, more thoughtful overall.
Wow. So what, I guess you always wanted to do it. You waited, or do you mind sharing what age you decided to try to go and get your pilot's license?
Yeah. So two things happened that just lined up kind of at the same time. So one of them was that I was pregnant with my first baby. So I was 29 when I had her. Is that right? Yeah. And while I was hugely pregnant, I think maybe I had just had her. It was in those first early weeks. I read this book that my mom had given me called Sky Girls. And it's a female pilot from Idaho. And she wrote this book about the 1920s air derby. It's a really cool book. I didn't know anything about this, but it's all these female pilots from the 1920s. It's a true story. They only did one, and it was like Amelia Earhart was one of them. She didn't win it. Spoiler alert. But there was all these awesome pilots. And I was reading through this book and thinking about all of these people, and a lot of them, all of them in the Derby were in their early 20s. And then when I was looking at the pilots afterwards, they were, it was a much riskier time to be a pilot, but a lot of them died before the age of 30. And my takeaway from that was, what am I doing? I need to get out there and do it. And my husband thought that was funny because he's like, if they all died,
I was like,
don't you think maybe don't do it? But I was really, really inspired by this book. I thought it was so cool, and I couldn't stop thinking about it and lay awake being like, it's time, I gotta get going. And I had this pressure of like, I have my first baby, I planned to have more, and I would never like have more free time. It was just going to get less and less and less and less. So when I had
True.
decided that, and also when I was pregnant, we had just kind of saved up as much money as possible, because I don't know if it's because we're medical or what, but we were just like, what if something goes wrong? So we were trying to save up during that time. So we actually had a little buffer right after I had her, and we were like, well, I guess we got let's do it. So when I went in to like buy my books and sign up with the flight school, I had her in her carrier. She was 3 weeks old. So it's just the
Oh
combo
my
of
God. You did this postpartum, 3 weeks
waddled in
old.
there.
Oh my
But I think it
gosh.
was also part of that was your whole brain changes when you're a mom. And I was just kind of like, I got to start living my life. And I also kept thinking about, you know, how, I felt very sacrificial when I was pregnant. I had a hard time being pregnant, not doing all that fun stuff I was used to, like whitewater rafting. And everyone has their own limits, but I was pretty
Yeah,
cautious
yeah.
and I didn't like it. And I just remember having her and like looking down at her and thinking like, I want her to feel like she can do anything. And like, I could pause everything in my life and just stay home with her. And I think we would both be okay. And that would be fine. But when I think about what I want for her life, I want her to like have a dream and just go do it. And I really think you can tell kids that all day long, but if you don't do it, and show them, it doesn't sink in. And so I was like, I'm just gonna go live my dream and hope that she watches that and that someday she can be like an astronaut, which is what she wants to do now, by the way. So we'll see in 30 years.
Wow. I think that's very special, Brooke. And I agree because showing actions, I mean, I don't have children, but if I did have children or if I was a kid, of course, seeing your mom go out, do your hobbies, be a pilot, do something cool. One, it shows that they can do it because if your mom can do it, you can do it too. You must be able to do it at some point. And it's very inspirational. And I think that's so special because I don't know how many, I mean, I'm just like really impressed by you postpartum, like 3 weeks going in and being like, I'm
I'm
gonna do
ready.
this. But yeah, it's the power of your mind too. But also, like, you're so right. If you want something, you have to go out and do it. Because if you don't take that first step, like, you could be waiting years and years, and then you're 40, and then you never did it, and then maybe then you'll make every excuse in the book not to become a pilot at that time because you're worried about X, Y, and Z. So I think that's sometimes you just got to take that first step, and that was your first step. What was their reaction? I'm so curious. Did you know them?
Um,
I mean, I know Idaho is kind of like small town somewhat, but
No, I didn't really. I mean, I've encountered a few. I just say I love backcountry pilots. They have the best stories, like such a quirky group of people. And so that is a relatively small contingent. I knew a few people, but no one who was really part of my training process until later on when I was a pilot and was kind of branching out more. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it was crazy. Like, it was a completely insane thing to do. I have these memories of like, I would be trying to, because you have to study, you have to pass a written test, an oral test, and then a check ride, which is the in the air test. And so I'd be
okay.
studying for my written test while I was like taking a pumping break at work. I would like go down with this huge thing and like be breast pumping and reading these books. And there was a time where I would like, the baby would wake up at 5 and I would feed her on one side and pump on the other side while I was studying. Then I'd get her settled back down. I'd leave the breast milk for my husband. I'd go fly for 3 hours and then I'd be back by 9 so that she had a little feed in between it. And then I get back on it and I breastfeed again. So all of my life when you're breastfeeding is like 2 and 3 hour increments. And I remember that
Yeah.
being like, this is a insane thing to do. It's crazy. And I mean,
You're sleep
you're
deprived too,
totally sleep
usually.
deprived. And there's a lot of discussion about that and like all the pilot rules about how much sleep you need to get. I was like, it's tight. It's
True,
close.
true. Yeah, yeah.
But also that mom guilt is really hard. It's really hard just going to work, let alone having like a hobby that's time consuming.
Yeah.
It's really tough. And I mean, I have to say I have a really supportive, like relentlessly supportive spouse, like wouldn't let me get away with feeling bad about things. And truly saw it as something that I was doing for the whole family, not that I was like being selfish and going off and
Yeah.
chasing my dream. He saw it as like, this is, you're doing this for all of us so that we can all be part of this stuff. So he was always kind of helping push me out the door when I was feeling like I can't do this. I can't like keep splitting all of my time up. He was really like, yep, you can, you got it. So that made a huge difference. And that he was, when I'm flying, he's on the ball a ton. I think a lot more than some dads in those very, very early days when everything's so time specific. So I had a lot of support that way. There's no, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have that. That was huge.
So are you back? Like, I'm curious on this. So you sign up for your schooling, you have to take your test, you're written an oral, and then to be in the plane for the very first time postpartum. How postpartum were you when you were getting into a plane for the first time?
I was trying to remember that last night. It is such a blur, not surprisingly. I think
Yeah, I
probably
bet.
I was like 9 or 10 weeks postpartum because I had just gone back to work a few weeks before because I wasn't still on maternity leave when I was in the plane, but I started studying on leave. Another cool thing that woman that wrote that book, it's a signed copy because my mom got it for me. And later on, like I had gotten my license and I was talking to a woman at the flight school, another one, and she was talking about the 99s, which is like the female aviators group, which is awesome, started by Amelia Earhart, still has chapters all over the country and is growing. And she said something about like, oh yeah, my mom's having a 99th party. And I was like, oh, your mom is having a 99th party? She goes, yeah, you should stop by. And I was like, I can't, I already have plans. And it was the woman who wrote the book. It was a huge deal. Nora Jean Jessen. It was her daughter I was talking to in my flight school. It's like, oh.
That was her daughter? You didn't know that?
No. Oh, and I was telling her, I was like, did your mom write Sky Girls? That book changed my whole life. And she goes, oh yeah, my mom, It was crazy.
My gosh.
It took me a while to like piece together, like, wait a minute, I know that name. Anyway, I was like, that felt like a whole first.
You should write to her one
moment.
day.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. She's
just let her know.
Awesome. I mean, she's like a huge deal. I think most female aviators probably know of her, but yeah, I was like, I'd love to go to her house, please.
Were you like, I mean, all I can think about is I think it's neat that you did it in the postpartum phase, not only because it's amazing, but also because you're right, your brain is changing. There's so many changes in your body, but also it's like fight or flight mode where you're just like, I'm going to carve out this time, just like anything you want in life. You're just like, I'm going to carve out this time. I'm going to make it happen. Like, sounds like you had a really supportive spouse, which is also so helpful, of course, when you have a newborn. But like, were you scared to be in a plane? Like, I feel like,
oh yeah,
I don't know. There's just like special, it's like doing a procedure for the first time, but on steroids. It's like, okay, like you're trying something new, but now you're like, your life is it's like your life, your instructor's life, you're up in the plane. There's so many factors that you can't control. How did you like deal with that? Were you just not trying to focus on that? Or was that not even a factor for you? You didn't really worry about that as much?
I worried all the time. It was definitely scary. Yeah, it was scary. And I mean, so when you're starting out, you have that instructor with you the whole time. I always felt like my instructors had more faith in me than I did until much later in training, but that's probably a good thing. But they would just be like, okay. And I, would watch them just take their hands off and you go. And I mean, relatively taking off in a plane is pretty easy. Steering it, you can get the feel for early on. But when we had to do these maneuvers where you simulate emergencies or you stall the plane, which is when you get it to stop flying midair so that you can recover it from falling out of the sky. Mm-hmm. I remember my first stall practice was on my first Mother's Day. And I was like really geared up. I just remember sweating a lot. And I remember thinking like, this isn't harder than having a baby. It really isn't. And I was like, okay. And that was true. Like I've done a lot of things and having a baby was harder, so I can just go do it. But yeah, I think so a lot of people solo, meaning you're flying the plane by yourself. I think you need 20 hours. That might have changed on different programs, but I think that's like the normal one. And I soloed right around there with those low hours. And there was like a moment when I was taking off and I could instantly feel that the plane was lighter because there are these little planes, and there was one person not in it. And I just thought like, what am I doing? It's like a perfectly good day. I could just be on the ground. This is insane. But then it really helped that I like loved it. I was totally hooked. As soon as I could take off, it's like this rush that I can't describe. And I just thought it was so cool. And so that I was thankful that I actually really, really enjoyed it. it got me through kind of the scarier moments. And I'm a preparer. So like you were talking about procedures, like I would rather do it 40 times, like
Yeah.
really get
Yeah.
it than like
Yep.
do it once and be afraid of it forever. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's scary. I use all these tricks to like talk myself into taking off. I get like the yips and like worry about, because taking off's easy. It's the landing that's a little more complex. And
And you're up in the air. There's nothing you
no,
can do about it
you
then.
gotta bring it.
So
You gotta get it down somehow. But I would think things like that, like if I was like at gunpoint and someone said fly this plane, could I do it? Like, yeah, almost always, yeah, of course, And if I'm up in the air and there's an emergency, could I land it? Like, pretty much, yeah. And so I just think, try and forget about all the accidents you've heard about and all the stuff in the training,
yeah.
and just
Yeah.
really focus on what you're doing. And as far as that being like a postpartum thing, when you're like, I was anxious to like walk down the stairs, like you're all
Yeah.
haywire. It was kind of it was like strangely, how do I describe this? Like meditative, that I was so task saturated. I couldn't think about anything else. So it was stressful, but it was almost like a break from, I wasn't thinking about medicine. I really wasn't thinking about anything. Just was doing this
Mm.
task in front of me. So I'd land after 2 hours and feel kind of lighter. I feel like I did something that I could be objectively good at, which motherhood isn't like, and nursing isn't like, really,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
could just focus on a task and complete the task. And that was like strangely refreshing to do. So,
No, that actually like makes a lot of sense because, which again is very impressive because your like postpartum is very anxiety driven, especially this was your first baby, so you're a brand new mom, and then to be able to pivot to a career that's super anxiety driven, but also just like trusting in yourself. I think that. I mean, I don't know, I'm not you, but I could see how that could be really rewarding and refreshing in the end because you learn to trust yourself,
mhm.
you learn to trust your judgment, you know your skill set, and it's mind over matter. It's like really quieting and calming all those anxieties and really just saying, no, I got
Mhm.
this. I know how to fly. I'm going to get up there. If something happens, I know what the algorithm is that I have to go through in my brain to hopefully stop a plane from stalling. Still horribly
Yeah.
scary, but I could totally see. I think that's so interesting
Mhm.
that you did that, and also really neat because you're right. I can totally see how life is so anxious, but then this thing that's even more anxiety driven calmed you.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know if that's the right way to
No,
say
it's
it, but I
true.
think,
Yeah. It was like, I just, you get so full and focused on something that it was like almost a little bit of a distraction, in a way that I think if I had a different hobby and I could still hear my brain going, it wouldn't be the same break, like mental break, that it was. Yeah.
yeah.
And then I think once
Wow.
I reached a point in training, you do the short solos, which is you just take off and land like 3 times. That's literally it the first time. And then later on, you have to do cross country solos. So that's like 2 hours alone. And that was when I felt like, that's when I felt like I was a pilot. Like, this is it. This is so cool. I really loved it. Yeah.
Wow. That must have, when you got to that point where, I mean, sounds weird to say, but did you ever think you would get there? Like, I feel like I would have the realization up there. I'm like, wow, I'm alone for 2 hours in the clouds with the birds or above the birds, above everything.
Mhm.
And what was that moment like for you?
I felt like I stole a plane. I felt like, who's letting me do this? Like like someone was gonna like pull me over and be like, you can't do this. Like I felt
The
kind of
plane police.
sneaky. Yeah, like they don't know that I'm new. I can just like fade into the background. But I think that, like, what's it called? Imposter syndrome. I think that's huge in everything. I feel like that as a nurse as well. Just kind of like, fake it till you make it and make smart
Yeah.
decisions. Don't, you still have to ask if there's a problem. But
Hmm.
some of that did kind of apply both ways, nursing and flying. Yeah, good decision making, but also just kind of staying focused is the most important thing early on. And like that task saturation, trying to offload mental things when you can, so that you can focus on the important things. I think I've applied some of that to
Yeah.
my nursing practice as well, and how I train up new nurses is like letting them kind of absorb information in safe ways before we pile on more things. That's really big with pilot decision making. And it's like, that actually applies to life in general. That's a really good lesson.
Totally. It just goes to show sometimes that like having hobbies or having something outside of your work environment can really change kind of how your brain approaches things as well, which I think is really neat.
Mhm.
And I think it's amazing that you've kept up both, first of all.
Thank you.
And it's so cool to hear that you could bring some of these maybe like approaching how you approach something new, and also bring that back to the world of nursing, which is really neat and what we want at the end of the day when we have hobbies
Mhm.
and we want to of course be happy, but also like be able to like learn new skills, which is really
Yeah.
neat.
Well, and I feel like learning any new skill that's totally outside of your wheelhouse, like there's nothing that I've done in life that prepared me for flying a plane at all. Um, but it's like a reminder of what it's like to be a student. And I think that's
Yeah.
also really important when you're teaching new people, just like to remember what it's like to feel like an idiot and feel untethered and like get through it anyway. I think it's a good confidence boost, and it's also a reminder of that feeling when you get really settled into your career. Sometimes you can almost forget how hard it is at the beginning, and I also believe in learning things that you're not naturally good at, because like I said,
Yeah.
I didn't have an interest in science really before nursing, and now I love it. And flying, I don't think I had any more aptitude than anyone else, and had to really learn from scratch and teach myself, how clouds work and all the stuff I didn't care about for years. Yeah, it was a good reminder to just always be learning and be gentle with people who are learning, for sure. And there was one thing a pilot said once that I also think about in nursing that I wish was in nursing school, where they're both jobs where you can't mess up, right? Like you
Yeah.
messing up as a pilot or as a nurse is a bigger deal than messing up in a lot of different careers. And so he said he had like a 3 stupid things rule where it's like if he's getting ready for a flight, even if it's a perfect day and everything looks great, if he does 3 dumb things before leaving the house, he cancels the flight because he's like, my brain's not right. So it's just something to like stop it in his tracks. So he
Interesting.
was like, if you leave your coffee on top of the car, like that's one, something that's just like absent-minded, or I forgot to turn this
Yeah.
off, or I turned the wrong way. To him, those were all cues like I'm not focused enough to be flying by myself. And I was like, that's not a bad way to think about your day. If you don't want to mess up,
Yeah.
you make these small mistakes, just kind of stop in your tracks and be like, okay, hang on. Wait, let me get my head screwed on again. Let me focus before I move into this, whatever important thing that I'm doing. It's like, that's a really good way to judge yourself on a day-to-day basis, because it changes day to day based on how you've slept and how you feel and, how you're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. So now I guess like when you fly
Hmm.
now, do you feel, I mean, you got to feel more, I'm assuming you feel way more comfortable than you did, of course, when you first started flying,
Hmm.
if I had to guess. Um, where like but you don't fly in easy places either. It's not like you necessarily fly where there's like a beautiful runway and it's easy to land and to take off. So where do you like to fly? Where what kind of places are you flying to? Where's your favorite places to fly to? Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So, I mean, by pilot standards, I'm still relatively inexperienced. So I'm just kind of starting out with this backcountry learning and all the places that I want to go, but I'll tell you my favorites. So the in Idaho, we have a lot of rivers that people raft. One of the main ones is the Salmon. There's the main Salmon and the Middle Fork. And there are little dirt and grass airstrips all along there. So some of those, um, ranches are my favorite places in the world, and that's where I'm kind of really training and practicing going. That's where I want to be able to fly my family into to camp out and hang out. And then there's also Stanley, Idaho has a cool airport. It's half paved, so technically kind of backcountry. Is you have to pay attention to different things because the altitude will affect how your plane's flying. When you're flying in between mountains, you have way fewer options for emergency landings, for example. um,
Okay.
and when you're doing these high altitude airports, you have to kind of follow different rules and have specific planes that will work there. If you don't have a strong enough engine, you can't get out of the mountains, right? Um, so Stanley, I like, it's partially paved, so it really feels like you're landing on a normal runway, but it's a higher elevation, and so they technically counted as backcountry. So when I had enough hours to be able to land there by myself, that was quite a moment because it's a really beautiful place. I love Stanley, and I remember flying in there, um, past these like beautiful, I mean, it's the Sawtooth, gorgeous mountains,
Yeah.
and seeing some mountain goats kind of like on eye level with me, and just thinking like, what? This is so cool. So yeah, backcountry is um, those kind of mountainous strips that are usually grass or dirt in general, and they're usually kind of smaller, so you have to practice your landings differently, and your go around options, your outs if it doesn't go well, differently too.
So is it based on the runway? It sounds like so to be a backcountry. I don't know what the what qualifies it as backcountry. Is it the runway per se,
So
or is it a little bit of
yeah,
everything?
usually I think if you were flying in between mountains but going from two paved runways, it's smart
Hmm.
to have additional training. Again, the altitude will affect how your plane flies, and you want to be prepared for emergencies. But in general, those won't be as different as flying into a grass strip. So if you, they call it stoling, the short takeoff and landing. So you have to, I'm going to explain this wrong. There's so many better backcountry pilots who can explain all these things. But if you're landing on those grass airstrips, you have to almost like pop a wheelie when you're landing and taking off so that you don't get that front wheel like
Okay.
jammed. And so you like the technique for taking it off, they call it a soft field. Your whole goal is to not get like stuck in mud and grass, basically. And so you slowly start the power and you keep the yoke back the whole time so that your front wheel is coming up, and you kind of taxi around like a wheelie until your bottom tires lift off, and then you fly in ground effect, which means you're within like a wing's length of the ground until you gain enough
Wow.
speed right over it to
Yeah.
take off. So there's little considerations you wouldn't have to do if you were on pavement. You could just roll full power and take off when the plane wants to fly.
That sounds way more technical. So it is more is
Oh,
it like a training that you have to get, like more class time or air time? I guess technically it would be in class time, maybe?
yeah. So, I mean, per the FAA, there's not like a different license or additional things that you need, other than that they kind of have a general, you have to know what you're doing. Like they could say, if you've never done it
I
and you try
see.
to do it, that's stupid. Um, I
Yeah,
fly out of a,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
but there's
Yeah.
not like an official certification necessarily. There are classes and trainings. But like the club that I fly with, insurance purposes wise, and all of this, there's only specific planes that are backcountry certified. They're small enough, they have enough power to fly in, fly
Got
out. In
you.
order to be checked out in those planes and on the airstrips, you have to go with an instructor and prove that you can, that you know what you're doing and that you can land at those airstrips. So seasonally, I'm going to continue to keep up on that and go with an instructor when I'm early in the season, make sure that we are checked out in the planes and the airstrips each time, because things change, and being legally allowed to land somewhere doesn't mean you're proficient enough to land there. So like
Yeah,
right now
yeah.
we're coming off the winter doldrums where there hasn't been much flying because weather will delay that. You can't fly into those little strips if it's bad weather like at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Um,
You guys get such variable weather
mhm.
there too, and there's so many things that can factor into if you can even fly that
Yeah.
day, which yeah,
So I'm like
totally
in
get.
that, like right now it's like on the cusp of really good flying season. I've been itching to get back out there.
So I guess this season, what's your goal flight? Do you have any flights planned that you wanted to do or anywhere that you're going, or is kind of just like continuing to get your hours in, continuing to feel more confident, learning new skills, get some of this backcountry skill sets on board? Is that kind of what your next plans are coming up this year for your flight
Yeah,
season?
definitely gaining hours and gaining proficiency at those strips, doing them again, because it's like, now it's been a full season since I've done any of that.
True.
And kind of doing more of the like overnight logistical planning, because I don't own a plane. So it's a lot of figuring out how to do that. Where do you park what plane at what place, and just like little things that would be fun
True.
to really get out there and play with the whole family more. Now that I'm not, newly postpartum or pregnant finally. So
I guess, Brooke, I know we're running out of time here, but I'd love to just do you have any words of advice for maybe women thinking about becoming a pilot, or, maybe how to choose a school? Any words of advice? You had some book recommendations, it sounds like. Anything else you might want to share for our listeners?
it was, again, having a mentor was huge. I've had a lot of support where I'm working. Some of those groups, like the 99s, are great. There's one that's female aviators, students in training or something. It's called FAST. It's a Facebook group, and that's been super helpful. People sharing tips on like, if you just had kids or whatever, had a break in training
Oh,
because of
cool.
pregnancy, or a lot of them are professional level, like first officers and pilots for major airlines. So there's a huge range. So finding your people online and that support is really great. The way that I did it, it's going to cost different amounts at different schools. It's not like one fee, because what you're paying for is flight time and instructor time. So if you're trying to do it
Mm.
more cheaply, I actually liked taking my written exam earlier. It's kind of a gamble, because if you take your written, you have to take your check ride within a year, I think.
Oh, I
But
see.
if trying to get all the knowledge down as much as you can on your own time, you're not paying for that. You're just studying and working really hard, and then passing the written. Then I could really just focus on the flying and getting the skills going after that written was out of the way. So I liked doing it that way, that was done, and I could just focus on the flight part. I think that helped me be more efficient and costless overall than waiting for someone to teach me the materials. So I'd recommend that. But if you were doing career piloting, there are so many different programs to choose from. Listen to your
Yeah.
gut if you're with an instructor you don't like, because there's always a great instructor out there waiting for someone who's going to be supportive, and you're paying them for their time. So trust yourself, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for telling us your story. And it was so great getting to understand a little bit more about what it is like to become a pilot, some of the fears you overcame, and just how you persevered. And I think that's really neat that you fit this all in postpartum and you're still working as a nurse. Um, Brooke, thanks so much for coming on today. And I really hope that, I can chat with you a little bit more on future episodes. If our listeners want to find you or message you, is there any way that they could reach out, or do you have any type of Instagram or anything you would like to share today where our listeners can reach out to you at?
Yeah, I do have Instagram. I think it's my maiden name, Brooke Bettis, but I have my um, middle name as my title, Brooke Aaron. So if that's who you're looking for, it's me. And thank you
Wonderful.
so much for having me. I really love your podcast. I listened to your chat with Baldeep, and it's put some ideas in my head about grad school. So I appreciate this. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brooke. We appreciate your
Thank
time,
you.
and we will see you next time on To Me Time.